Our speaker today is Tim Alderton. He's a native of Western Pennsylvania. Tim graduated from Penn State in 2002 with a BS in horticulture. He then interned at Callaway Gardens in Pine Mountain, Georgia. And then after that moved to Plant Delights Nursery in 2005 at a position there. In January 2006, Tim came to the Raulston Arboretum, and he's been here ever since. He's a board member of our Piedmont chapter of NARIC, and he's also been doing a lot of traveling with some of his co-workers here at the Arboretum. He's here today to talk about the wildflowers of Mount Rainier and Mount St. Helens. So please welcome Tim Alderton.
Morning. It's not comprehensive on wildflowers, but anyways, I'll get into some of that. But, the last few years I've gone traveling with Chris and Cindy Cromwell and Nancy DeBrava. And last year it took us to Washington. We flew out, I think, on the 10th of August last year. You guys wouldn't remember this, but we flew out in the evening to Seattle to see Tech, and we were supposed to land, I think, around 9, which I think we landed almost on time. It was a little delayed, but we sat on the tarmac for 2.5 hours. There was a guy who stole a plane, cargo plane, and basically committed suicide in that plane. They had closed down the airspace for hours, and so no one could go out for hours before we got there, but they were letting planes in. So we were in that backlog. They had to clear out things. So we didn't get to our, I think, into the terminal probably till well after 11 or between 11 and 12, and we didn't get to our Airbnb in Olympia until about 1 or 1:30, and then of course to settle down and go to bed it was like 2-ish. So we started late that next morning, and that's when we went to Mount St. Helens. It was actually one of the closest places we went to. So we went 1.5 hours to 3 hours one direction each day to our venues. And so I didn't take quite so many pictures at Mount St. Helens. I was not quite as awake. So anyways, we're going to start out, and just as we're arriving at Mount St. Helens, and this is more or less chronological of how our days went on those days. So this is Chris here in front of, this is the sign. It was at the Johnson, or not the Johnson, I forget what this one is called. This is the visitor center that's right at the original place, the Mount St. Helens Forest Learning Center. And Chris likes to take his pictures of all the signs of the national parks as we go and other places, so his memories and stuff. But so anyways, at that place, I didn't take many pictures inside, but there were a few plants that we started seeing there. The first one, which is one we saw throughout our entire trip, Anaphyllus margaritacea here, one of the pearly everlastings. We saw this at Mount St. Helens as all over the place, different ecosystems there, and then also at Mount Rainier, which you'll see later on. But this one just became one of the signature plants of our trip. Beautiful, pure white blossoms for us at that time. And you'll see this is rather dry. Mount St. Helens, the wildflowers weren't as plentiful there when we were there because they are earlier than they are at Mount Rainier. It's a much lower elevation. The elevation here was probably around like 2,000 to 3,000 feet right where this picture was taken. While when we were at Rainier later on, it was anywhere between 5,000 and 6,500 feet, the elevations that we were visiting. So that gives you a little indication. But I remember when I was little, if anybody read the article I wrote for the newsletter, I remember learning about Mount St. Helens relatively early on and seeing things, news updates on it over the years. And I always thought it would be cool to go there, and not really thinking I'd ever get that far. That was so far away from Western Pennsylvania. But anyway, so seeing this was about 38 years after the eruption. So versus, I was looking up last night for Mount Rainier. The last major eruption they believe was about 1,000 years ago, and then about 5,000 years ago they think it blew off of like the top 1,500 feet of it. So it was well over 16,000 feet at one point they believe. So, and there'd only been very minor things occurred since then. So it's been rather stable for the last 1,000 years versus 40 years. So it was kind of a really cool contrast to see these locations. But Mount St. Helens is quite a bit further south, lower elevation, and it's quite a bit drier where we were at. So again, there was a very different flora with the difference in ages. But this is one plant that we would see both places, and it was quite ubiquitous there. So another plant, this is one, actually, someone asked me if we'd be able to grow some of these plants as you see here. This is one that you occasionally see here. It's not as happy, but this is Mahonia aquifolium, the Oregon grape holly. This was just along the pathway there, just feet basically from that last Anaphyllus. Beautifully in fruit here, and this is on top of a ridge we're looking down over, but just thought that stood out to me. There, growing in its native habitat there is very lush, despite the fact that it was so dry. This is not a native, but this is one that we would see throughout the day at Mount St. Helens. I don't remember seeing any when we were at Mount Rainier, but this is Jacobia vulgaris. You might, it's one of the plants that was formerly a senecio. So Dusty Miller, if you ever grew that, that's a senecio. And pachyras are now split out of senecio as well. And this looks really similar to a pachyra, as well as some of the other senecios, which you'll see later on in the day, or the other, later on in this trip. But anyways, this was one we saw. Those were about 3 feet tall, bright yellow flowers. And I'll have a close-up of this later on. There's a really cool insect that goes on this. But this is an import from Europe, Western Europe, that has naturalized after the eruption, basically. This was kind of cool. There was a docent there when on this one viewpoint that we walked up to, and he was telling us about, I don't know if you can see in here, there's actually old trees here. These survived the eruption in May of 1980. They were in the shadow of this mountain here, so they did not get blown away and totally decimated. You can still see, there's some dead, but they're actually standing versus fallen over. In this next one here, you can really see the outline. This is all new growth. This was probably an area planted by the paper industry. Has gone back outside of the areas that are now the national monument, I believe that Mount St. Helens is. Outside of that area, they have planted extensively, and you see areas. Oops, go back here. You see areas like this occasionally, but this is probably all fir. Noble fir was the most common, I was told, so I don't know my fir trees real well, so and I wasn't up close enough to see what those were. But another ubiquitous plant that we saw wherever we were at, not in big patches or anything, but was the Camerion angustifolium here. This is also called epilopium. You may have known it as that. Fireweed. It's pretty common. These get 3-4 feet tall, sometimes bigger than that. But beautiful pink flower spikes on this, and you'll see. I scatter these throughout the talk actually, but from different locations. This was actually at another viewpoint just down the road. We just stopped at a little pull off real quick, and I saw this one and snapped this. But, yeah. I love this whole family. This is the Onagraceae family that these are in. So the fuchsia family, and if you know the fruit that forms on the fuchsia, that's this part right here. It's the ovary, and I'll show you some other plants, actually other epilopiums that have that same thing, and it's even more extreme. I just love the ovary is so inferior in this case.
Does that grow here?
It might. I don't know that it would like our summer heat. That's the trouble with a lot of this stuff. It does not like our summer, hot, humid summers. This is a dry summer area. The whole West, they might not get rain for a couple months in the summer. We think of the Pacific Northwest as being wet, but it's mostly from, say, September to May. Then you have June, July, August, which are pretty much dry. So, and actually, the day we were here, it was raining. It was the only day it rained on our trip. So this was actually rain falling here, just very light. But this was the next place we truly stopped for a few minutes. And it was our first real good views of Mount St. Helens, despite the fact that it's in the clouds. This is Lewitt viewpoint, and you can see some of the remnants of the trees that have gotten blown down. All the erosion here has been from the rain since, and the snow melt since the eruption in 1980. And literally, I forget, there was as much as a couple hundred feet of pyroclastic flow and debris that had settled in after the eruption. So the river down here, which I can't think of right at this moment, darn. I don't know anyways, but this was, like I said, our first view. But near the parking lot, before we got to that view, we started seeing some other wildflowers. We started seeing a few of the lupin species. This is Lupinus, I believe, latifolius. There's lots of lupin out there, but this is probably one of the most common ones. And then this one I can actually identify. This is a pretty easy one to see. This is only a couple inches tall, like 6 inches tall. It's this little Lupinus breweri. It's silver foliaged, adorable little thing. And we saw this all over. And the ground in this place is quite open. Another plant that we'd see throughout our whole trip, both here at Mount St. Helens and at Mount Rainier, was Castelligia miniata, one of the paintbrushes from the Orobranchaceae, which that family, there's so many more of them out there, I think, than we have out here in the east in that family, the Orobranchaceae, the broom rape family. So they're hemiparasites. They used to lump them into the snapdragon family, so. But they split those out now. Pardon?
You said parasite?
They're hemiparasites, yep.
What is that?
Hemiparasite, they don't necessarily have to have a host, but they typically have a host. They do much better with a host, and they still form chlorophyll. So they're not a total parasite. They're still making some nutrients for themselves. So they can still live on their own, but they benefit from having a partner. They'll often have a hostoria, which is the root that kind of goes into their neighbor and steals, taps into them with grasses and other forms. So, Charlie?
It's also a hemiparasite.
Our native one is, yes. Some of the other species in other parts, like in the west, you'll see them that are totally devoid of chlorophyll. Those would be true parasites. But I just love these old trees. The remnants of the stumps that they left, and some places you see them down, but again, you can see a few of the things here. We already saw, this is the Anaphyllus again, and then here's Castelligia, more Anaphyllus. Just these picturesque, I mean, naturally, or not natural, but since these were chopped down actually, but just, it was really gorgeous, so I had to include some of those. But we did see a few penstones here that day. This is Penstonum cartwellii, and actually I'm going to go back right in here. That's probably Penstonum cartwellii. This is Penstonum cartwellii. It's a sub-shrub forming species of penstonum, not like our native ones out here in the east, which are rosette forming. These actually have a semi-woody base, so and they're blue, and we can't grow the blue ones. I wish. Blues and purples. Anyways, another one of these logs. And you can see the ground here. This is the way most of it was. The ground was sterilized during the eruption because of the either the pumice, it's all pumice, or the heat, whichever did them in. But you're seeing, this is more the lupin breweri, the Lupinus breweri, and the Anaphyllus, the Castelligia. Here's another lupin species here. So it's stark, but it was gorgeous. Yes.
Was any attempt made to repopulate with natives? Or
I don't
was
think
this
they did.
all
I think this
natives?
all came in naturally. And that's what I remember hearing about on the news.
Yeah.
They'd say such and such, they've seen starts of this plant or these animals coming back in after the fact. It was always really interesting to me.
It's surprising to me no trees have moved in yet.
We see some later on here. Actually, probably in the next couple, you'll see the trees. Actually, this green down through here, that's actually trees. Probably Douglas fir and other firs. We did see later on, we would see some hemlock, the Suga heterophilus. And down in here, you'll see ulmus. There's 2 or 3 species of ulmus. I don't try to identify them, so later on you'll get to just see some pictures of ulmus trunks, which are really cool to me. But another one that was out on these open areas was, this is, which name did I put? Cystanthes. This has a couple different names. Cystanthes umbellata. This is only the second time I ever got to see it. We had seen it the year before when we went on a trip to Yellowstone, and This is now in the Montiaceae. It used to be in the Portulacaceae, so the Portulaca family, really closely related. And our native spring beauties, the Claytonias, are in the same family now, Montiaceae. So this is closely related to that. And here's a close-up of some aging florets, which are just really pretty. That is just prostrate on the ground. It's just a couple inches tall, and that whole clump might be 6 or 8 inches wide. So that you can see again how the soil here, all pumice. And where we saw these in Yellowstone was kind of similar. It was around a lot of the geyser vents. So in mud flats and stuff. So it's these really severe growing conditions. In this picture here, up here, this is one, we grow this here. Someone would know if we can grow this one. This is our weed here. Rubex acetosella, red sorrel. And then the Phycelia is this clump here. There's a couple different Phycelias out there. We do have some native Phycelias here in the east, in the mountains in particular. You see a bunch of them. They're typically these soft purples and blues. This is one that's white to cream if you're lucky, and then the seeds turn brown on it. And then there's the Cystanthes are down in here. So for comparison, these are Cystanthes here. This is probably a couple feet tall here. And then I just love this one with Mount St. Helens in the background, and then another of the Lupinus breweri. And again, the Anaphyllus here, and actually behind the Anaphyllus, I said earlier, this is the fireweed again. This is the Camerion right there. Pardon?
It seems taller in this picture.
Oh, it's just the angle I took it at. The Anaphyllus are about this tall, actually. They're 2.5 to 3 feet tall, and the Camerions, they would be 3 to 5. Then we went to the Johnson Ridge Observatory, which this is the only picture I had inside. I forget what the story was on this tree, but that was just to denote different location. This is up the road a little bit. The lowest point was probably at about 4,200 feet. This is like 4,300 feet, so not much difference. And it's going to look, it looks out onto the same area. But it was an interesting day. We went in there because it was actually raining again. This was actually near the parking lot, which was kind of, there was a hill that they had, I don't know if it was built there or whenever they built the observatory, or if it was after what was left after the eruption. But on this side is where the parking lot was, and this was alongside of it. So you, again, more Anaphyllus, more Castelligia miniata, and then we're adding in here one of the cascade asters, the Eucephalus letophyllus here, and this pink here, which is the Nothochelone numerosa. So this is it's kind of between a penstemon and our turtle heads. It's in between genus. It's kind of an interesting thing, and we saw them throughout that whole day after we saw them here at the parking lot. So. Also down in the grasses which were aging, we got some of the sedums. This was Sedum oreganum, which I just thought the foliage was so nice on this, and then it was glistening, which I think is shiny to begin with, but when you have that mist on it, it even glistened more that day. So just that red showing, if it were not stressed because it was the dry season, it'd probably be much more green. In the hot weather, when they dry out, they turn more red. So. And then managed to see another penstemon. This one, I believe, right here. Back here's another one, actually, a different one. This is the Cartwellii back here, but this one here, which is not a great picture, but I got it, was Cerulatus. So slightly different species. It was, again, growing in parking lot. Then going over the ridge near the observatory itself, this is, again, said the Camerion, Angustifolius, and Anaphyllus here growing on this really rocky soil, really nasty. They're those pioneer plants that are able to grow anywhere. Both of those have windblown seeds, so that's probably how they're getting in there so well. The willow herb or fireweed is the Camerion. That is tiny seeds that are with a sail on them, basically. So it goes. This was kind of cool. Spirit Lake, I remember hearing about this guy. There was like a lodge or something near here, and the guy refused to leave. I think he was one of the people who got killed in the eruption, if I remember right.
Harry
But this,
Truman.
pardon?
Harry Truman was his name.
Oh, he was? It was Harry Truman?
Harry Truman was his name.
Okay, but he had a lodge somewhere there. But this lake was raised over 200 feet.
Whoa.
And what is really cool is that silver, that what looks like a beach, that is logs
Oh.
still floating there, and you can still see some floating out here in the water. So that's all still from 40 years ago, still floating there. But you can see the regeneration here, which is kind of cool with this. Probably a lot of this is the ulmus again and firs coming down in there. And before we left the observatory, this one posed for me. It was from here to there away from me with my camera, so I got some good photos of him. The Cascade golden mantled ground squirrel. We did see this at Mount Rainier as well, but this one was just a good photo too. So we had some lunch in the parking lot because if you go there, there's no food. It's something. There was one food truck. The road in is a Spirit Lake Highway, I believe, and it dead ends at the observatory. And you can go off from there and do hikes and stuff. So, anyways, so we backtracked a little after we had lunch, and we went to Hummocks, and which is we were right over here, is where the observatory would be, and so it's a couple miles. Up here, it was 4,300 feet. This is about 2,500 feet. Later, at the very end of the day, we went actually to Coldwater Lake. I don't have that in this presentation, but this lake did not exist prior to the eruption. A dam formed right in here. These hummocks are kind of like, it's a wetland system with mounds in it. And so you got this juxtaposition of wetland plants with dryland plants growing up very close, or these dry mounds growing real close to it. It was quite interesting to walk through. So we did basically, we came in here and we went around this way and did that loop. And you hear, at times you hear the roar of the river here, which I can't think of. Oh, it's the northern branch of the Tuttle River. That's what it is. And that's the river that drains this area. But anyways, this is one view. Like I said, the drier views. And actually down in here, there's a wetland. This is wet down here. And then these are the raised areas. It's all volcanic pumice and everything that got washed down. I think they said this went up by a couple hundred, anywhere from 100 to 100 feet, or 200 feet as well in elevation.
Does that mean it just pushed the whole ground up?
Oh, it's all the debris that came down out of the mountain since like a quarter of the mountain got blown away. So, and then, like I said, the forest. This is what the predominant deciduous tree was. We're Ulmus species, which were at least 2, if not 3 species. And I did not try to identify them, but after, this is at most 40 years old. So it's just really cool seeing these. And I love the lichens and the mosses on them as you're walking through them. You go from that first picture here to, which actually you're starting to see some of the conifers and the Douglas fir and firs, and actually some hemlocks to areas like this. So again, we have the Nothochelone. This was growing in the forest glades predominantly, but I saw it growing right out in the middle of nowhere next to stones in those dry areas. Really versatile plant. We came from here in Raleigh, where it was probably in the 90s, to the next day wearing jackets. It was only in probably the upper 60s to low 70s when we were there because of the rain. But in some of the more open areas on the glades, the transitioning from the moist to the dry, you get to see this blueberry here, or more of a pink berry. But I love this Vaccinium parviflorum. Just tiny fruit, but profuse in that color, that soft red. In grassier areas, you'd sometimes see some orchids. We saw this species several times as we were walking around the Spiranthes Romanophiana. I can't spit that one out. That one's not a fast one there. But this was one, I didn't even know this genus. I had to look this one up the other week because I hadn't figured out what it was. David White showed us some pictures of these in Ireland at the last meeting. So this again is closely related to the paintbrushes. So the Castelligas. This is Euphrasia numerosa, and it's I believe this is a perennial species, but some of them are annuals. But again, it's a hemiparasite. I thought it might be in the Scrofulariaceae or the Lamiaceae, but no, it's a Orobrechaceae. Tiny little flowers there. Growing among the trees, you sometimes see some of the Holodiscus, I believe Rosaceae, if I remember right. Kind of looks like a spirea, but these can get bigger. They can be 10, 15 feet tall, but this wasn't quite that big at this time. But growing at the base of things, it was kind of, they're pretty early successional, but they're coming in there. And when they're fresh, they're white, and then these are aging, so they're turning pink. And then we walk back into another glade of the alnus again. I just found the stark contrast when you go out in the open where it's all the pumice, and then you come into these glades. And in this one, we had some Pedicites frigidus. So this is really colt's foot, more or less, or Vandy here. I know she had Pedicites fragrans, variegata, or Gigantea variety variegata, weedy things. But this is one that's native to the western United States, southern Canada. These plants here are probably a couple feet tall. Flower early in the spring. This is growing in a wet area. There's a stream underneath here. But later on, I'll show you another picture that's much smaller. It looks totally different. Anyways, but underneath them, there was a Claytonia perfoliata. Again, this is Montiaceae, the formerly Portulacaceae, and it's, again, our spring beauty relative. They call these miners lettuce. They would eat the foliage of this one. So, but you can see the stream running through here. They were still in flower and actively growing. And this is that Jacobia vulgaris from earlier. I showed you that, and it was at the first visitor center we stopped at. And this is also an imported. They imported these to manage them a little bit. These caterpillars. This is the cinnabar moth, and I found a picture online what it actually looks like from Britain.
Pretty.
Yeah, gorgeous moth, and the caterpillars are so cool. That black and orange, alternating colors there. So managed to see some of those in there. And this one I have misidentified in my write-up. I have it as a Collenia, but this is not that. This is Zeltnura, and I had never heard of that before. Eulenbergeri. There's a couple species of them in the Pacific Northwest. They're actually in the gentian family. I believe it's an annual or short-lived perennial. This was growing on the edge of a pond, or just at the foot of the pond. Just maybe 10 to 12 inches tall. And again, more Anaphyllus. I think we're going to transition here.
Can I
Yeah,
ask
that's a
just
close.
one quick question?
Sure.
Which may be sort of off topic. How was the fauna? Birds?
I didn't pay attention to some of it. There were birds around like crows and stuff. I don't remember so much here. There were elk, but they were at the first visitor center we stopped at. The guy points out, can you see the elk here? And I have pictures I didn't want to include that because you still need the magnifying glass on the screen, and I could circle them. There were literally a whole herd of them. They were a couple miles away. There was still fauna there. You'd see birds and stuff coming in. And if you, we weren't there at the season to see a lot of the songbirds.
Mm-hmm.
Probably, I'm guessing in the spring you'd see a whole lot more. And we went to Clearwater Lake at the end, and there was actually a diamond up there, one of the small ones. I can't remember which species on the water. So there was stuff there, and fish have actually come back in. Clearwater Lake didn't exist as a lake before. There's been fish that have naturally come back in, some of the trout species, but they've also did reintroduce some trout, another species of trout in there as well. So I don't know if there's anything in Spirit Lake yet, fish-wise, but because it was a nasty soup from what I heard and read about. I think they said that it had stuff come back in as well. But after the eruption, the water chemistry was crazy for a couple of years. there we go. So now we're transitioning to Mount Rainier. We didn't actually stop to get a good picture of the sign, so this was me taking it out of the front of the car because we're coming in. We did not go to areas too much with the big forest here. This is probably western red cedar, Thuja plicata, and hemlock, Tsuga heterophyllus, and I forget what else they said, were the predominant species, but anyways. But we did stop at one little spot here. This is a quick lookout we stopped at, and I happened to, I crawled down over the bank a little bit, and I managed to find by accident this Cornus. It used to be Cornus canadensis. They've now split this one out, and I have to see if I can spit this name out. Unalaskensis, I think is how, yeah, Unalaskensis, something like that. So it's a western form of the Cornus canadensis, the bunchberry. And if you look over here, I didn't even say it, but this is Linnea dioica, the twin flower. We typically see it in boreal forest. And I said about hemlocks, this is probably Tsuga heterophyllus right there, the western hemlock. In the understories, as we're driving down the road, we didn't stop many times in those, but it was one of the few places we got to see these. The Oplopanix horridus. This is an Aralia. So if you go out in the woods, or at least where I'm from, in western Pennsylvania, you get Aralia spinosa. This kind of has, if I didn't get a good picture of the stems, but they are covered in spines, or prickles as well. So that's where the horridus, I think, comes in there. It's terrible to deal with. But beautiful leaves. You see these in old growth forest. Actually, close to where Chris and where we all stayed, there was a patch of old growth, and I remember actually seeing this in there. We walked into it one evening. No, we walked into the patch, I don't know, it might have been as big as the Arboretum of old growth surrounded by where we were at, and it was kind of cool. We walked around for about 45 minutes there in the dark. Anyways, we did stop at an overlook when we were first able to see Mount Rainier. There was a loop back, and you could look back onto it. And as you can see, this is so hazy. The only day, most of the time, I guess, you can see Mount Rainier from Seattle and even on the west side of Puget Sound. The only day we saw it was the day we were at Mount Rainier. It was smoke, so much smoke. Last year was a very bad year for wildfires out there. So it was just constantly covered in smoke. We got to see hazy pictures like this, or hazy views like this, but this was the first one as we really good view. And then again, does anybody remember what this is now? I've only pointed it out a few times now. This is the Camerion angustifolium. Yeah, this is the test. So we also found an echeveria at this location, right, Chris? Remember the echeveria?
Yes, we did, yes.
Yeah, and we put it on our windowsill and we toasted it. Also at this spot there, I managed just to see a little clump of another sedum species, Sedum divergens. It was just growing along the edge there. So then we went to Paradise. Has anybody been out here to Mount Rainier? Because there was a couple here earlier, they said they had been there. Paradise is the main spot I'm guessing on the south side of the mountain to go, where everybody goes from. There's tons of trails from there, and it's some of the best wildflower fields around there. But so when we went there, we went a little bit on the Skyline Trail, and then we broke off onto a side trail called the Golden Gate Trail, which then merges back into the Skyline Trail. So this is part of the Golden Gate Trail here. Skyline merges back in up here, and it's way down here is where they separate.
I'm looking at the trail that looks like a
This is an old trail here that they don't
Zigzag?
want you to use. This
Yeah.
is what you're using now.
Right. That's a switchback.
Yeah, the switchbacks, yeah. You can clearly see this was the trail. They had started putting debris and stuff in front of them to redirect you, to make it a little bit safer, as well as to not, this is going to erode out a whole lot easier because it's going straight down versus the horizontal path, or diagonal paths. So anyways, so from the start of the path, we started seeing, there's wildflowers all around the parking lot there, but this is one that I first started liking, actually. I like pedicularis. This is, again, the same family as the paintbrushes and the euphrasia that we saw earlier. This is, we have a couple species out here in the east as well. They aren't as spectacular as the western ones, but this one I'd never seen before. This is Pedicularis racemosa. There's actually 6 species I know of that are listed for at least most of Mount Rainier, and we ended up seeing 5. So, but this is racemosa, and probably in a mesic spot that's not overly sunny, but then if it gets a little bit more sun and drier, often takes on these red tones. Just beautiful flowers here in clumps. This was grown on a bank just as we were walking along the trail. This one we would see the most of the way up the mountain, but I kind of ignored it after a while. This is Luetkia pectinata. It's in the rose family. It just forms a low ground cover with these wands of white florets on them. Again, with the red on the stems of the flower stalks. And actually, this is a rose I didn't even mention. I don't remember which species, but one of the native roses out there. Then you start up and you get these meadows, as you can see. This, it's a Euphallus, and I'm gonna, or Eucephalus, and I'm guessing it's the Ledophilus, or most of it is. That's the most common one that's out there. There's a couple other species. Plants formerly known as aster. There's so many of those now. They've split that whole genus up. So, in the path starts out as paved, and then it goes to just a irregular, gravelly type path as you go up further. As it splits with the from the skyline, and skyline eventually becomes the same type of trail as well. Just a beautiful view there, actually, in the end. And for that, yeah, that's Nancy. For those who don't know, and this is Cindy. And Cindy loves veratrums, and so I had to include some pictures. But this is Veratrum viridi. There's 2 different pictures here, but this is right along the path, and this is a whole meadow. And the pink in here we'll see later on, but that's another Castelligia in there. But love the close-up of the flowers. You don't appreciate them. They're green, but green can be quite pretty in that structure. To me, they always look like corn plants. I would see them back home in different species and think, oh, that's kind of looks like corn. And then these are the coolest. These are actually seed heads. This is the Anemone occidentalis, which all over the mountain you saw these. The truffula trees from Dr. Seuss is what I would describe them. The soft, later on you'll get to see one in flower. I found one when we went the highest up we went. We saw just one. They're early. I've seen them on, one time I've been to the Crater Lake. They were on the rim flowering in the snow, and that was Memorial Day of 2009. But so they flower quite early, because this area, I'm guessing it had, the wildflower season in this area starts mid-July and goes till the early September. So it's a lot later due to the elevation and the latitude being higher. And this gets tons of snow. Actually, Mount Rainier, it's the most glaciated, I think, of the mountains in the lower 48, maybe all of the United States. It can't be all of the United States. But it's the most glaciated mountain. It's considered one of the most dangerous mountains. They think ultimately it could erupt. It's still active, or I think it's dormant. I don't think it's active. But like I said earlier, it's been about 1,000 years since it's had a really big eruption. So, but it could do some major damage because the pyroclastic flows from those melting glaciers, they believe, could flow the whole way down to Puget Sound, to like Tacoma and Seattle. So, where no one lives there. So, so if something happens, you don't want to be there. And so I mentioned this a little bit earlier when we were looking at the veratrums, the Castelligia parvifloras. We would see these going up the mountain even more. This was just a relatively close up. Later on, we'd see them in meadows. Just that spectacular deep pink, and one of the paintbrushes. And this plant over here is the next one. This is the Spirea splendens. This kind of looks like a Japanese Spirea that's growing on the mountain. It's probably way hardier. You'd see these in low shrubs, they'd be about 2.5 to 3 feet. This is starting partway up the mountain. We had gone probably half a mile or so, or a mile even, before I actually saw them really in flower. Down near the visitor center at Paradise, they were in the lodge there. They had already passed, so they weren't really that nice to look at that point. But and among here, there's a whole bunch of other things. Yeah, we got up a little further, started to see some of the gentiana septrums here. They were predominantly in just one area we saw these, and the grasshoppers like them. None of the flowers were perfect, but still, these were adorable little grasshoppers, I have to say. I didn't look up to see what species they were, but they were only maybe an inch long, and I think they were mature, but they were all over. They liked those in the lupins, which were also here and there. This is a plant we saw throughout wet areas. This is Erythranthe louisii, formerly known as mimulus. They reclassified them, so it's like, okay, I think I can spit this out. But you'd see these along wet areas. Let's see here we go. Along streams in particular, in wet areas. So this is growing in habitat here. There's another, actually, a species I'll show you later on right here. But you'd see them in big swaths in the wet areas. And we saw these the whole way up to where there was snow too, so along streams. So it's a beautiful plant. It won't like it at this elevation. Wish it would. So we saw it up at least to 6,500 feet, where was about as high as we went here. And up on there was kind of a small hilllet, I guess you'd say. There were a few clumps of Xerophyllum tenax, the bear grass. And I think tenax associated with that plants they used for making fiber, using the fibers from, so like Iris tenax, Formium tenax, New Zealand flax. They use those long fibers for making things. In this picture here, this is Tsuga menziana, or mertensiana, the mountain hemlock, smaller growing species. We'll see, these aren't flowering in here, but you'll see these later on in flower, and I'll tell you what those are there, and all that little bit of red tint there. And there's actually some of that same plant here that I'll tell you later. But in here, this is right along the path. I'm sure this was all over underneath everything. That this is one of the lycopodiums that is now has a terrible name of Diphasiastrum. I could spit lycopodium out, no problem. Diphasiastrum alpinum. So the only reason you can kind of tell that they're that and not another plant that we'll see later on as well is they had their cones on them already. The other thing in here, I don't know what kind of blueberry here, but there's a blueberry, one of the vaccinium species. The soils, I'm assuming, are very acid, based on there's a lot of ericaceous stuff in here. So, and here, these little round things I said earlier about, I showed you the Wetkia. That's some of that growing. So, this was just a nice view back on one of the switchbacks. I was higher up, and Chris and Cindy were stopping. I think Chris might actually here, and then Cindy's there, and I'm up here on a different one. So, but looking back, that's smoke. So, there's some really pretty mountains we were told over here too. You can see just them in the haze. But again, what was this plant here? Does anybody remember that one? That's the anemone occidentalis. Yeah. So, I have to make sure you're all awake.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe a periodic test
We're
here.
paying attention.
So anyways, we continued up even higher. This was the second species of pedicularis I managed to get a decent photo of here. This is Pedicularis contorta. This is probably at around just over 6,000 feet, maybe 6,100. The previous picture, that was probably 55-ish, I would guess. But this is a little bit different in shape, flower. The foliage on those is a little bit different, and the structure of the plant. And then this is just looking back. So I'm up on that zigzag stuff you saw in that initial picture, and it zigzagged down, followed this trail here. Here on the backside of these trees is where the bear grass were. We came up through here, and then through here. And this is paradise down here. This is where the lodge is. And this is parked full of cars here. We managed not to have to park there. We got to actually be in the real parking lot. But then there were other trails that went up this way. We did not get up in here, and they go up onto the 14,000-foot mountain. You'd see hikers that were just specks up on the glaciers up high. So I believe a couple species of, it could all be the same valerian, but I'm calling this Valeriana scholarii. There's another one I'll show you later on. This was much more compact, and this was much higher elevation than what we'd see later on. So this is one of the heliotropes, or valerian, Valeriana, common names for that. But you see those throughout there. If you ever grew Centranthus, which is it's a European plant that you sometimes see as a perennial here in the eastern United States. Likes rock outcroppings and rock gardening type situation. So this is a cousin of that. This is a third of the pedicularis. This is pedicularis ornithorhyncha, something like that. And what do you think its common name has something to do with?
Elephants.
Birds, yes. It's like bird's beak, lousewort or something like that. So, again, it's a hemiparasite. And here's you can see here the bird's beak. And then, actually, I'm going to go back here. You see these specks of white here and this stuff here. That's going to be in our next picture here. And this stuff here, and here, and here. That is this stuff here. That is the Cassiope hortensiana. And then the pink here is the Phyllodes impetriformis. So, and this is snow. This is about 6,300 feet, maybe 64, somewhere in that range. That was our first patch of snow that we actually got to. So, in mid-August. So this is the 14th of August. Here's a little bit closer view of the Cassiope. Right there, the little bells. And this is what that lycopodium that I showed you earlier, if you didn't know any better, if it weren't in cone or this weren't in flower, you could confuse the two, just at glancing at them. So here's a real close-up of those bells. So, and then this was the other plant in that picture, and I love these. Chris and I were able to see these on our way to Beartooth Pass at Top of the World in Wyoming. They weren't in flower. They were still just starting to grow and form buds, but that was the year before in June. And we had hoped to see them in flower there, but did not see them there, but we got to see them here at Mount Rainier. And beautiful patches here. On the background here, this is a Veronica, which we'll see later on, Cusickii. And then this is our truffula tree from earlier. That's what the flower looks like.
Oh.
This is about 6,500 feet. So that's the Anemone occidentalis. And just a few feet from that, because that was right along the path on one side. On the other side of the path, there was a little rock outcropping here, and there was Micranthes tolmiae. So this is a former saxifrag. That's another group of plants. There's a lot of saxifragaceae out there, as well as the orobranchaceae that we have some in the east here, but they have more of them. And let's see, one of its cousins, Tolmia menzesii. Did anybody know what that plant is? Piggyback plant. So there's the Tolmia. It's a person's name, I believe, that was named after. But anyways, so that kind of connects that. So that's also in the Saxifragaceae. Didn't see any that day, but I saw them other days when we were going around. So the piggyback plants. And this is the Pedicularis contorta again, on top of the mountain. Getting a little bit of wind, and over here, this is the anemone here, right there. So there's some more anemone here, but not in flower. And some more phyllodes, or phyllodoces. I want to skip a syllable in there, phyllodoces. And let's see, actually I didn't mention it, but that's probably an Antenaria or a pussy's toes right there. There's a lupin right here. But this is up pretty high. Again, this is 6,500 feet up. This is about as high as we went. Beautiful, nice crevice garden here. I didn't get over to, this was off the path. I didn't want you to go too far off paths, but there's lupin. I'm guessing these may be Heuchera cylindrica, which I didn't see up close, but it's possible. There's pedicularis in there. There's all kinds of things that are growing in that area there. So
what kind of stone is that?
I would guess it's volcanic, because it's not. It has to be pretty young. Yeah, I don't know. And this tree here, this would be a subalpine spruce, which I didn't show you. It was beautifully wind-shaped, low thing. Might have been 15, 20 feet tall, but 40 feet wide. We managed to see one species of phlox there, Phlox diffusa. Saw at a lower elevation, but it was already done flowering. This was up again at around 6,500 feet. And at one of the, up at the top, again, there were still streams. This is the Erythranthes louisii here, but this is the Pachyra suda aurea. So we have Pachyra or Senecio aurea here in the eastern United States. This is a cousin of it from the west, growing here in wet areas on top of the mountain. So Mount Rainier. And again, there's a little bit of Veronica hiding in here as well. And then this was just, I love this picture. See the mountains over here? The trees and mountains. The Mimulus louisii, I'm going to spit it up that way because it's so much easier, in full flower here.
Is that 4 o'clock?
No, monkey flower is the common name for those. And there's going to be another one here. This is I hinted about this one when I first showed you the other one. There was another species. This is Erythranthes talinii. This is a small yellow-flowered one. Who's been to Yellowstone? You'll see Erythranthes guttatus going all around a lot of the springs, or the springs and the geysers. You'd think they'd be toasted. This is very similar. They've split it out. This has a running rootstock. Well, the guttatus tends to have more of a true clump, and it gets a little bit taller than this. So, but this is native throughout the Rockies. This is actually, I think, a Rocky Mountain monkey flower or something, but it comes up into the Cascades as well. And we started back down then. That was about as high as we went. Saw a few of those ground squirrels up there. They posed for me there. Saw some other things, but don't have quite much time since it's already 11. I really need to get going. We have to go down the mountain. Anyways, this is more of the Cephalus letophilus. So, and down here, Cindy got ahead of me then. That's Cindy. But she missed out on. Is he gonna? Oh, he didn't. Oh, darn. Let me go back here. He should. Come on, I have to get it to go here. There we go. We saw several of them on the way up. But I love the marmots. And I was like 4 feet from him. I mean, they're not afraid. He's eating lupin and Wistorta in here. So, right along the pathway. Click happy here. So, the Chimerion angustifolia is closely related to this. That used to be an epilopium. That's still an epilopium. This is Epilopium clavatum. And I mentioned the ovary on the one before. This is one that's going to seed right here. And you can see it below the flowers up here, and then that's the actual ovary there. So where all the seeds at. So this was right along a stream. This was there as well. This is the only place I saw this Macranthes or Saxifraga marshallii. And then there's another one. We're going to see this saxifrag at the lower elevation. It looks so much better. Anyways, that one was in flower a little bit. And of course, there was more Anaphyllus. So we've got back down the mountain almost, and this is right near the parking lot. We had some, there was Castelligia miniata all over, in this one area. Here's the edge of the parking lot right there. But anyways, so we had some lunch at the visitor center there, and then we went for another on another trail, the Nisqually Vista Trail. So beautiful meadows. This is a little bit, I'd say about 5,200 feet, 5,300 feet, somewhere in that range. It kind of goes downhill, but you got some wonderful views of the mountains, as well as these big meadows. Again, here with the cascade asters and the veratrums here. Here is one of the first new plants here. This is Senecio triangularis over here, and you can see it mixing in here with a bunch of things, veratrum and the Castelligia parviflora here. The white is Bistorta, which we're going to see here in a few minutes. Another species of valerian, like I said, that I might see. Pincus, this I believe is Valeriana sicensis, growing in here. It's kind of hard to pick out because there's also the Bistortoides in here. And here's the Bistorta bistortes, and I managed to capture it with a police car moth, yes, on it, which I can see why they call it a police car moth. And then we went into a little bit of a wooded area that was kind of shaded, and we saw this little rubus. This is a dwarf raspberry species, Rubus laciococcus. And then these are some of the glacier or avalanche lilies, I don't know which, they were done flowering. So like our trout lilies out here that we have in the spring. Then this was the fourth species of Pedicularis, Bracteosa. This is the largest species. These can get up to like 3 to 4 feet. There's a little bit of Valeriana there too. Just more Castelligia, and I think, let's see here, yeah, and more Castelligia, parviflora. Again, more Bistorta. And Lupinus latifolius, we saw this again here. Higher up we saw it, but the groundhogs had been, like I said, munching. They really seemed to like it. Or not the groundhogs, the marmots, cousin of our groundhogs. I'm from Jefferson County, Pennsylvania. Punxsutawney, or hence Groundhog's Day, is where I'm from. So, and oh, wrong direction. Yeah, a little more lupin there. And then this is Nisqually, the Nisqually Glacier is up here, and this is the start of the Nisqually River, which drains, there's like 30 some rivers that drain off of, or 25 or 30 rivers that drain off of Mount Rainier. So,
Your water down there?
yeah, this is actually water here, Mount Water, and the glacier starts right in here.
You can hear the water rushing from up
And
that
let's see if
high.
I can, if we're real quiet here, you can hear a little bit right there.
So is that sheer rock?
Yes, that was a major drop off right there. Yeah, it went down several hundred feet. So, yeah. Oh, and this is our next spot. This is the Paradise River. We went back to the parking lot, and we managed to go down the road a little. So this is the next spot. We're going to find out about this plant up here in just a minute. So, this is where the pull off along the road for the Paradise River. And there's a trail that goes up along it, but we kind of went right into the river itself. So in here in this picture, I said about that plant, there's Epilopium luteum in here. So this is a yellow flower type of Epilopium. And all these are Epilopium luteum up in here and here. And there's a little bit of the monkey flower here, the pink one. Here's a little bit closer. And we'll get real close. And I keep on talking about these big ovaries. That's the seed pod. So this is like a fuchsia. So that's the Epilopium luteum. And birds, I try to get a few. They don't always cooperate. This one did, and I've only ever seen these. I think I saw it in Wyoming. I know I've seen them in Colorado. I saw a dipper. I think I was the only one of the group who saw the dipper. But this is one of the few songbirds that actually dives into the water and swims. Because they will creep along under the water, they will creep along the rocks under the water and get insects. And it ranges from Central America to Alaska. So it's a really wide distribution, but Western North America. So. Oh, and here's more of the Epilopium luteum. And then again, the Chimerion angustifolia, which is its cousin, formerly known as Epilopium angustifolia. Let's see, Heucheras, coral bells. This is one that probably would not grow here because most of the western species don't like us. This is, I believe, Heuchera glabra, which we would see here later on as well. But this was growing right along the stream on some of the rocks. Cousin of it, this is right down at the water. It's this green thing, not the purple here. That's probably an erigeron. So a fleabane is my guess. But this is the Mitella caulescens here, which is both in seed and there's tiny flowers there, which you need a magnifying glass to look at. And I didn't get that close, so it was on the other side of the water. Also in that same area, we've got some columbines. We've got Aquilegia formosa, the western cousin of our Aquilegia canadensis. And this conifer up here, that's mountain hemlock, Tsuga hortensiana. There's a little trail that went parallel to this. This ultimately would go up, I believe, and hit the Skyline Trail as well, but we didn't do that. We just did a short walk here. But this is all all these tall spikes. Is the pedicularis bracteosa again, and then again its cousin, the Castelliges. That's parviflora. There's Bistorta in here, and some of the plants formerly known as asters. And here's most of these back here were past flowering, and these are mostly seed heads. This you can actually see the flower head, fresh flower stalks here. And this is right across the road where we parked. Again, what's this plant? Anaphyllus, yes. And we had a beautiful little Anna's blue on it. I'd seen Anna's blues throughout the morning, actually up on the mountain. Occasionally they were trying to procreate. You can see two of them playing together, but they didn't. It wasn't fast enough with my camera to catch them. So we're going down. This is the 5th species of pedicularis out of the 6 that they have there, and only the 5th though that I get to see. And this is elephant head. You said yes. Elephant head earlier. This is Pedicularis groenlandica. I've seen this in Colorado and Wyoming. Always love this plant, and I don't have a close up here enough to see it, but it looks like it has 2 big pink ears and a trunk. So hence an elephant head.
It won't grow here.
No. No, it won't grow here. So anyways, that was actually at a lake that is known for its reflections of the mountain. And this was just a little further down the road. This is Sunbeam Creek, and Cindy, there was Sunbeam Falls, Chris. I didn't even know it. It was right across the road from this. We didn't go to it. But I thought this was wonderful, except for we weren't real safe on how we were getting there. Because you had to cross this culvert, basically, and carefully crawl up stones and go across to get... We were risking our lives doing this, but...
Or your foot.
Yeah. And then there was a drop-off, so it's like... We got here, and there were all kinds of things here. Again, the Epilopium clavatum here, and again, as I keep on pointing out the big ovary, the big seed pods, the very inferior. And then this is, I think, the next plant here. This is the Saxifraga mertensiana, and you would like growing in the just a little bit of the water on the edges of the water. Here's a close-up of the flowers. I love the leaf, though. On it, the lobing, and again, a beautiful crevice garden here full of Heuchera glabra. And I've mentioned this one before. I saw this up probably at 6,500 feet. This is probably closer to 5,000 feet now. We're way down. Veronica Cusickii, and you got the Saxifraga in here again. Again, here's the water rushing over here. And more of the Mimulus Tillingii. This is really nice just growing here. And you can see how this is so stoloniferous versus, I said, the Gutatus, which is more common, much wider distribution, has a clumping habit. This has, you can see that it runs. And again, it's running here, and there's Saxifraga here. And then I said about this, we saw this at Mount St. Helens area, and it was like 2 to 3 feet tall. That's probably about a foot at most. And it's because it's not as far along, hadn't expanded as much, but the leaves on it, it looks so cool, this Pedicites frigidus in that situation there. And there's Saxifraga seed stalks coming up out of there. And I think this is our last location. This is Christian Falls. This is right along the road. I'm on a stone bridge, risking life of getting run over to video this. So, but anyways, there were just a couple things there. This was right from one of the viewpoints. Everybody else is looking at the falls, and I'm down here crouched on the ground trying to get a picture of this little Campanula scularii, which is just maybe 6 inches tall, and the flowers are maybe 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch across. That's just the softness of blue. It's not a pure white. It has a blue tint to it. Across the road from it again, where I was trying to get run over, was a rock outcropping, probably due to the construction of the road itself, which I just thought was interesting. None in flower, but there's a runcus up in here, and over here, and then there's more of the heuchera glabra in here. There were various ferns. This one, I'm going to guess, is either a Dryopterus or Thalepterus, but I wasn't sure. I didn't mention that one. This is a Polisticum here. Which is a couple species out there. Oops, wrong direction. And then Adiantum ludicum was there. This is, again, the runcus up here, the goat's beard. This is close cousin of our northern maidenhair, which we have here in the east. This is sometimes classified as Adiantum pedatum, variety ludicum. But out there, it's often just called a ludicum as well. So I think this is our last slide. This is looking back. This is actually, we're standing either next to or on top of a bridge that's crossing, a log bridge crossing the Nisqually River. So I showed you that river from the start and down on it. Those are enormous boulders. So, hope you've all enjoyed. Did I put everybody to sleep?
No.
Any questions for Tim?
Great.
What dates were you there?
This was August 14th. And it was August 11th. It was Mount St. Helens of last year. That was a hard one. Okay. Any others? Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you.